It's been a while since I've covered any folklore stories. Actually, it's been a couple of years, so I thought today it might be fun to explore some more, and where better to take a trip than a nation with more than its fair share of urban legends and horror stories. I'm of course talking about the Philippines. I've handpicked 5 of my favourite Filipino tales to narrate. Some are first-person accounts, others overviews, but they're all equally eerie. So switch off the lights, close the curtains, and enjoy some eclectic folk tales from a truly diverse country. Today's video is sponsored by Mech Arena, the fast-paced, team-based 5v5 shooter that promotes friendly, competitive mobile play. This free-to-play game focuses on short, high-intensity PvP matches, and is perfect for anyone looking to jump in, blow up some mechs with their buddies, and be out in 5 minutes flat. When it comes to the mechs, there's a bunch to collect and choose from, and they're all fully customizable. From their paint jobs and skins, to the weapon combinations you load them out with, you can create unique mechs that suit your personality and playstyle, and use them to dominate in a variety of game modes, from control point capture to 5v5 and 2v2 deathmatches. If you like to get down and dirty, you can charge in head first with a kill shot equipped with shotguns, but if you're more like me, you might value defense over offense. Roll with a juggernaut, equip an autocannon or 2, and use your personal shield to stay in the fight. With new mechs, weapons and game modes being added every month, Mech Arena is constantly evolving and becoming more strategically deep. Releasing globally in August, but already available in the US, UK, Canada and some other lucky countries, Mech Arena is completely free to play on Android and iOS. Use my link in the description or scan my QR code on screen now, and you'll get 1 gold crate, 15,000 credits and 200 A-coins. Again, use my link or scan that code, and see if you have what it takes to become a champion in the Mech Arena. Here's a little known legend from my hometown in the Philippines. There's an infamous mountain here called Mount Cristobal. For tourists and people passing through, it's just like any other mountain you might see throughout my country. But we locals call it the Devil's Mountain for a reason. All sorts of peculiar and tragic happenings have occurred on and around Mount Cristobal, including the deaths and disappearances of many hikers and adventurers over the years. Some people claim that the devil himself lives there, hence the mountain's ominous nickname, and most avoid going there like the plague. Us locals believe that supernatural creatures roam the area after sundown. The unsettling feeling one gets when approaching the mountain is enough to scare most people off, even those who have never heard of the mountain's reputation before. In fact, there are countless stories from would-be hikers who were overcome by an eerie sensation when they approached the mountain, and so decided not to climb it. Sadly, not everybody trusts their intuition. When I was a child, my father owned a gas station. I was hanging around with him while he worked one day, playing with some toys in the back room. That morning, a group of 3 tourists from America came in. They bought a few snacks and drinks, fueled up their vehicle, and asked my dad if he could help them with some directions. "Sure, where'd you need to go?" my dad inquired. "The foot of Mount Cristobal," replied one of the young Americans. "We want to check out the mountain, but we don't know the best place to start our hike. Do you know a good starting point?" My dad's eyes widened, and his jaw tightened. He told them that it was a dangerous place, linked to numerous terrible incidents. Said that it was the devil's playground, a cursed mountain. The 3 of them laughed at him, unfazed by his concerns. "That's why we came here in the first place. We want to check it out, chill with the devil for a while." I know now that most people from other countries think urban legends are all nonsense, and that the 3 Americans believed going to the mountain was just a bit of fun. But my father took the stories about Mount Cristobal very seriously. "I don't know the best place to start your hike," said my father. "In my opinion, there is no best place to start. Not if you have any sense anyway. It's dangerous, I tell you." The group ignored my father's remarks, paid for their things, and drove off without any more discussion. I looked up at my father, and even though I was young, and this was many years ago, I remember the concern on his face as he watched those tourists leave. I asked him what was wrong, but he said nothing more about the matter. 5 days later, news started circulating around town about what had happened. An American tourist had stumbled out of the forest surrounding Mount Cristobal. He was completely alone and delirious, having had no food or sleep for days. I instantly recognized his face in the local newspaper my father was reading. It was one of the Americans that had come to our gas station. The paper told his story. Apparently, he and his two friends found their way to the foot of the mountain after all, and began making their way up to the top. They'd brought a tent and supplies with them, and planned to spend a night atop the mountain. They set up camp near a cliff with a steep drop, and cooked themselves some dinner. At nightfall, the three of them sat in a row on the cliff's edge, their feet dangling over the side of it, the kind of stupid thing young people do when they feel invincible. They sat there in the dark, looking out at the beautiful world that surrounded them. Soon, they realized something wasn't right. "Hey, do you guys feel that?" one of them said to the others. Collectively, they all sensed that there was something in the darkness below them. They stopped their chattering and peered down into the total blackness of the sheer drop under their feet. Without sound or warning, a pair of hands, attached to two long arms, shot up from below them, grabbed the middle tourist by his legs, and, in one fell tug, pulled him straight over the edge. They heard their friend scream as he fell and vanished into the blackness, followed by a loud and distinctive thud as he hit the ground. One moment he was sitting there, then, in an instant, gone, swallowed by the darkness. The two remaining men scrambled from the cliff's edge. They couldn't believe what they'd just seen. Two impossibly long, stretched arms had just raised up out of nowhere and stolen their friend. They ran, and in their frantic escape, lost track of one another. One of the men kept running downhill, pushing through the brush and avoiding pitfalls. But as he made his way down the mountain slopes and came to a clearing, he found that he was somehow higher up on the mountain than where he'd started. He continued walking down the mountain, only to find himself somehow ascending it. For 4 days he wandered, trying to find his way to the bottom and back to civilization, all the while thinking he was losing his mind. Eventually, Mount Cristobal loosened its grip on him. He emerged from the mountain and was given medical assistance. It was a miracle that he had survived. The man who was pulled over the ledge by the hands was found at the bottom of the cliff, his head cracked open like a coconut, his bones shattered. The second American was never found. To this day, it's unknown what happened to him. He remains unaccounted for, another lost adventurer claimed by the mountain. "I tried to warn them," said my father as he read their story in the paper. "I tried to warn them, like so many others before. But you can't save everybody." Their story was read about and quickly forgotten by most locals. Like I said, deaths and disappearances are commonplace on that mountain. They were just another 3 men who went to meet the devil and got far more than they bargained for. One folkloric creature from my country that everyone knows of is the balbal. Considered by many to be one of the most frightful and disgusting creatures in Filipino folklore, they're said to be an omen of death, but there aren't many who have a personal story to share about them. Most believe them to be fictional creatures too, but my uncle knows otherwise. He told me a story from his youth one evening when the two of us were drinking alone and having a heart-to-heart, and I'm going to share that story with you now. My uncle wasn't one to lie about such matters, and he recalled this incident with such clarity and sincerity that I for one believe him, and I'm not the only one. In roughly his words, this is what he shared with me. I was only 10 years old at the time. My father, your granddaddy, had suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. My brother, your father, was 4 years older than me, and very protective. After our dad passed, he effectively became the man of the house, despite only being a teenager himself. Took good care of Mum and me, but there was something that he always got angry about, and that he refused to let me discuss. It was the day of our father's funeral. A crowd of family and friends were gathered around his open grave. We listened to the priest philosophize on death for a few minutes, and then watched as the coffin was lowered into the grave and covered with dirt. There were a lot of tears and condolences, the usual stuff. I remember thinking at the time, I should feel a lot sadder than this. I hadn't shed a single tear during the whole service, and I felt guilty about that. I loved my dad with all my heart, of course. He was a good man, a kind man. I'd spent the last few days in tears over his loss. But there was something about the atmosphere around that grave that felt off. It distracted me from my sadness. It's hard to put it into words, but the air had this sort of heaviness to it. There was a pressure to it that I hadn't felt before. Everyone's words seemed muffled, just slightly. No one else seemed to notice it, so I put it down to my emotions wreaking havoc on my body. As we all stood around, watching the hall be filled, I suddenly felt this strange compulsion. A compulsion to look towards the banana trees in the distance. I gazed at those banana trees. It felt like I was looking at a picture where everything else was out of focus, except the part that your eye is supposed to be drawn to. Everything and everywhere else seemed a little blurry, but not this one particular section of trees. This was a weird sensation, and I tried not to panic, to fit in with all the other people around me, standing silently around the grave. But I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead, and I couldn't look away from those trees. I just knew there was someone behind them, watching us. And then I saw him. A man with very pale skin, dressed in black. Not unusual for a funeral, but even from 50 or 60 meters away, I could tell there was something not right about this guy. Another person might have seen him and thought that he was just someone who knew my father, that he was watching from afar because he was shy or out of respect. Somehow, I just knew otherwise. After the service, the crowd dispersed, and my brother, mother, and I went back home, now one family member short. But I couldn't stop thinking about that strange experience, about the banana trees and the man hiding within them. I knew I had to go back and investigate, alone. I knew my brother would call me a dramatic fool, and after the day we had all just had, I didn't want to cause my mother any more distress. So, after dinner, I quietly left the house and walked quickly towards the nearby cemetery. The sun had already set, and I wanted to get back before my mother knew I was gone. There were no electric lights or anything like that at the time, of course, but by the time I reached the gates, my eyes had already adjusted to the darkness. As I made my way past the first few headstones and got deeper into the graveyard, that blurry, otherworldly sensation began to take a hold of me again. The closer I got to my father's grave, the stronger the effect became. I had to stop to collect myself. Standing still, I could hear a noise coming from around the corner ahead of me. The corner that led to my father's resting place. My stomach was in knots as I stepped forward and turned the corner. There it was, Father's grave. It had been dug up. His coffin was open, and there, standing over him, was the only thing in focus. A tall, pale figure. Something between a man and a monster. It was shaped like a human, sure, but was much skinnier. The proportions were all off. It wasn't wearing clothes, and you could see each rib. Its face was buried deep in the coffin, but I must have let out a gasp because it quickly jolted up and looked right at me. Its eyes were dead, as if skin had grown over them, like a Greek statue. At the end of its stretched face was a grotesquely long tongue, which thrashed back and forth. What must have been its mouth was stained with some dark liquid. I immediately knew what it was. A balbal, the grave robber from the stories. And just like in the stories, I knew why it was there at my father's grave and what it was doing with him in his open coffin. It was eating him, peeling his skin off with its tongue and bloody, curved fingernails. I turned and ran for the gates, didn't stop running until I made it back home. I was in floods of tears, and my brother immediately told me to get a grip of myself and to not worry Mother. He asked me what on earth was the matter, told me that he was the man of the house and that he'd take care of it, whatever it was. I confided in him what I'd just seen. He scolded me, told me not to make up such stories about our dearly departed father. And then, realizing that I genuinely was in a state of shock, he told me that he would go to the grave and take a look for himself. I begged him not to go, but he told me I was just in a state of grief, and that he was just going to take a look to put my mind at ease. In the meantime, he said, I had to wait in my room. It was too late for me to be going back outside. 20 minutes later, he returned. He knocked on my door, told me that he went to the cemetery, and that there was nothing there. That there was nothing out of place at the grave, and that everything was as it should be. Nothing out of the ordinary, and certainly no balbals out for a midnight feast. I had just been imagining things, he said. But I knew what I'd seen, and I told him that he must have just missed the thing. Your old man got real serious with me after that. Told me to stop making up lies, and to never speak of this ridiculous balbal story again. He said, nobody likes a liar. You're gonna get a reputation if you go around saying you saw a balbal. But I wasn't lying. Maybe I was just seeing things, yeah. Maybe I did just have a moment of madness, sparked by the loss of our papa. A grieving mind can play all manner of strange tricks on a person, that I know. But it was so real that I can't explain it. I just know I saw what I saw. I know it was a balbal. I know it was watching us in its human form during the service. And I know it came to eat our dad. Anyway, I stopped talking about it after that. With that, my uncle took a swig from his drink. I didn't know what to make of his story, but I knew he wasn't lying. That's to say, I knew he truly believed he saw a balbal. But maybe my uncle was just a bit crazier than I thought. Sometime after my uncle told me that story, I decided to speak to my father about it. I expected my dad to laugh about it. To say, that old story again. Your uncle must have had too much to drink. Instead, he just looked at me with an uncharacteristically serious face. Your uncle and I haven't talked about that for a long time, he told me. I'm surprised he brought it up with you. It's a bad omen to mention it. My uncle had told me about my father's reaction at the time. How he'd told my father about the balbal, and how my father had mocked him and told him to show more respect to their father and to stop lying about such drivel. The concern in my father's voice now caught me off guard, and I questioned him about it. There was a long pause. My father exhaled. I knew he wasn't lying. I saw it too. My dad explained that night, when he went alone to investigate his brother's claim, he found their father's grave was covered, just as it should have been, but that it seemed freshly filled in, as if the dirt had just been placed minutes before. A scraping sound caught his attention, and he looked up towards some banana trees in the distance. There, he saw a pale, emaciated figure, with statue-like eyes and a thrashing tongue, dragging what was left of a suited corpse into the tree line. He then went home and pretended not to have seen anything. Firstly, to protect his brother, to make him think that he had just imagined the balbal and that the creature wasn't real. And secondly, so they didn't talk about it. That would have been inviting death into their lives. If you talk too much about the balbal, he'll come for you. My father said that he'll never know for sure, but he's certain that if he were to dig up my grandfather's grave, inside his coffin, he wouldn't find bones. Instead, he'd most likely find the trunk of a banana tree, the very item a balbal is said to replace a body with when it comes to steal one. For the sake of my uncle, I promised my father I wouldn't reveal his secret. The fact that they both had seen the same thing, and that it wasn't just my uncle's imagination. My father also made me promise, regardless of my own beliefs, that I never talk about the balbal with either of them again. This was all a long time ago, and both my uncle and father have since passed. I kept my promise, and didn't bring the story up with either of them again. Thankfully, I can say I didn't see anything at their funerals. No pale figure lurking in the tree line. Nothing digging them up under cover of darkness. I don't know if I believe in the balbal fully. I don't believe it's exactly how the stories say, that seeing it is an omen of death, or that talking about it will draw its attention to you. But I do believe that they both saw something at my grandfather's funeral. Something very few people ever have or will, and that such folklore stories exist for a reason. Because a select few know the truth and pass those stories on to the rest of us. And now the end is near, and so I face the final curtain. We all know Frank Sinatra's classic rendition of My Way. The song's lyrics are sung from the perspective of a dying man, reflecting on his life and how he lived it the way he wanted to. What you might not know, however, is that in the Philippines, many people consider the song to be cursed. Here's why. Open karaoke bars, or videoke bars as they're sometimes called, are very popular hangout spots in the Philippines. They're cheap, lively, and fun places to grab a few brewskis and sing your favourite tunes in front of a bunch of strangers. However, My Way is avoided by almost everybody, or outright banned by bar owners. That's because, beginning in 2002, a strangely high number of murders started being linked to the song in videoke bars throughout the nation. There are numerous accounts of patrons choosing to sing the song, and then being slaughtered by another customer, either during their performance or immediately afterwards. There was something about that song that was either hypnotizing people into a murderous rage, or some unexplained force that was cursing the singer. It wasn't until 2007 when this social phenomenon really started grabbing headlines. In May of that year, a 29-year-old man was shot dead by a security guard in Rizal. The guard had told the man that his rendition of My Way was off-key and warned him to stop singing. The man refused, and so the guard, infuriated by his terrible singing, pulled out his pistol and gunned him down. After that incident, news of the My Way curse spread like wildfire, and past cases where the song was the catalyst for someone's death were reported on. As crazy as it sounds, videoke bars across the Philippines started removing My Way from their song lists, with the owners terrified that the song might lead to more bloodshed on their premises. Even today, fear of the curse persists, and if you find a place in the Philippines where the song is still available, it's very rare to hear anybody sing this once popular karaoke song. In reality, the unusually high number of deaths linked to My Way in the Philippines probably has a much more grounded explanation. New York Times writer Norimitsu Onishi wrote about how the My Way killings may have been, quote-unquote, the natural byproduct of the country's culture of violence, drinking, and machismo. One guy laughs at another guy singing, his ego gets bruised, and a fight breaks out, resulting in one of them getting killed. Pop culture expert Roland B. Tolentino agreed, noting that videoke bars in the Philippines can often get rowdy and violent. According to him, fights often get sparked whenever someone hogs the microphone, sings a boring song, or butchers a track with their terrible voice. But why have so many deaths been linked to My Way in particular? Firstly, My Way is, or at least was, a popular karaoke song throughout the nation. It was chosen more often than other songs, so statistically it kinda makes sense that more people would die during or shortly after singing it than other songs too. I mean, if a song's going to get a death curse attributed to it, it's gonna be a popular one. Secondly, the song itself just kind of winds Filipino men up the wrong way. It's very triumphalist, and according to Butch Albarracin, a singing school owner, the lyrics, quote-unquote, evoke feelings of pride and arrogance in the singer, as if you're somebody when you're really nobody. It covers up your failures. That's why it leads to fights. With all that in mind, the curse itself makes a lot more sense. A drunk man singing the song might suddenly feel a lot more egotistical, and another equally wasted gentleman might not take kindly to that. They picked the wrong song, annoyed the wrong guy in one way or another, and boom, only one man's left standing. That being said, there are a lot of other ego-boosting songs out there that are sung throughout videoke bars in the Philippines, and none of them have sparked the same kind of strong response as My Way. Why it's this song, and only this song, that seems to drive people into a rage is anyone's guess. A few years back, a co-worker of mine shared a story with me. He was 17 when this happened. It was November, and he and his friend went to explore an abandoned school late at night. They snuck in through a broken window and passed through empty hallways that were once full of life. I don't know what they were hoping to find in there. Perhaps nothing. They made their way down one particularly long stretch of hallway, and in the darkness ahead of them, they heard the distinct sound of footsteps slapping on floor tiles. Against the silence of the night, there was no mistaking the sound for anything else. 10 meters or so in front of them, at the end of the long hallway, the blackness of the wall slowly became more light with each footstep they heard. someone was coming from around the corner, and whoever they were holding something that was emitting a lot of light. As the light grew and illuminated the end of the hallway, my friend and his friend stopped to see who would come around the corner. But just as the unknown person was about to step into sight, the sound of their footsteps abruptly stopped. The light was now fully illuminating the end of the hallway, and my friend could see the end of a man's foot slightly poking out from around the corner of the wall. My friend and his companion stood alert, waiting for whoever this person was to round the corner. They were expecting to get yelled at by someone. But whoever this person was, they merely stood motionless, their foot the only part of them visible. "Hey, who is that around there?" my friend's companion shouted out. But the figure didn't reply. My friend wanted to leave, but his companion was curious and actually took one step towards the unknown figure. That's when the unknown person stepped out from around the corner. The lantern he was holding in his hand lit him up fully in the darkness. Now, taking quick steps towards them, was a priest, wearing black robes and beads. His head was missing, the stump of his neck completely visible. His lantern swayed back and forth as his free hand reached out towards them, as if he was planning on grabbing them. My friend and his companion ran back down the dark end of the hallway, clambered out of a window, and sprinted as far away from that school as they could. Another of our co-workers also listened to his story, and said that the headless priest was probably decapitated by Japanese soldiers during World War II, a period in which beheadings were commonplace for clergymen. He said that the priest had most likely been executed near the school and was wandering the hallways, looking for his missing head. "He probably saw your heads," said the co-worker, and wanted to use one as his own. This has to be the most infamous legend in this video. Stretching from Samar to Leyte is the San Juanico Bridge, an impressive piece of engineering with sordid rumours attached to it. If you find yourself driving the Pan-Philippine Highway and stop to ask locals about the bridge, they're bound to tell you about its construction. Back when the bridge was being made, between 1969 and 1973, a story spread like wildfire across the region. Imelda Marcos, First Lady of the Philippines and a prominent politician at the time, was the person who had ordered and was overseeing the bridge's construction. Rumour has it that the superstitious First Lady went to a fortune teller and asked them for advice about the bridge project. The fortune teller told her that mixing blood in with the concrete was going to give the bridge extra strength and ensure that its construction was a success. But not just any blood would do. The juice from corpses would help a little, but it was better if those juices were fresh and from young hosts. As the story goes, children in the area started going missing from their homes, never to be seen again. So many vanished that people started discussing their theories, and, according to construction workers, they'd heard that youngsters were being harvested and slain to help make the bridge stronger, their bodies being mixed in with the concrete. What gives this urban legend some credence are the sheer number of children that disappeared in the area at the time the bridge was being constructed. Not to mention, Imelda Marcos, the politician who ordered the bridge's construction, turned out to be massively corrupt, and, along with her husband, had stolen billions of dollars from the Filipino people. She and her husband, who are conjugal dictators, actually hold the Guinness World Record for greatest robbery of a government. Not exactly moral people. While the rest of the country suffered economically, she and her family lived a lavish lifestyle and displayed no signs of sympathy for their fellow countrymen and women. On top of that, Marcos really was a superstitious woman and would have definitely heard the myths about blood strengthening foundations. That's to say, if anyone was going to be willing to use children in a bridge's construction, it would have probably been her. So, there was an evil politician overseeing the San Juanico Bridge. There were a bunch of youngsters in the area who vanished, and the story must have circulated for a reason. Of course, the truth will never be known, but if on the off chance that one day it does come to light that this story was more than an urban legend, well, I don't think many of the locals would be the least bit surprised. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I was thinking about turning this into a series, kind of like the American road trip series I did, where I'll go through a bunch of different countries and explore their urban legends and folklore. What do you guys think? Does that sound like a good idea? Let me know down in the comments. A huge thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Alex Greensall, Azrael Warakai, Charlie Lackey, Connor Louthan, Crawford K McDonald, Expand On, Foxlicity, Gina Valera, Grey White Rabbit, Infamous-senpapi, Leonardo Martinez, Lord 210, Mira Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Native Beauty, Nadine, Peter Loggerage, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Ronnie Franklin, Sarah Ramirez, Silas Geist, Sloane Crawford, Taylor and Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Ms. Crypto, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, Lydia Glassley, Tony Hardy, Yoshi6500, Patrik Hrušecký, Dappa, Boise McSnatchy, Matthew J. Bauer, Amanda Hanson, Hamish Kay, and Phantom Knight. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. Remember to smash that like button or I'll smash you, and you'll be hearing from me again very, very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.